Okay, hello everybody. This is Birdie again from My Favorite Quilt Store, and we are going to start doing some tutorials, and we're going to do a tutorial on cutting out the first two things that you cut from this kit. But before I do that, when I start a new kit, first thing I do when I get it, if I ordered it online, is I go through and make sure that all the cuts of fabric that are supposed to be in the kit are actually in the kit. I've only, in all the years I've been quilting since, almost 25 years, and only one time has this happened where I bought a kit and I took it home from the fabric store, and I was so excited because I thought it was so pretty, and I laid everything out and I realized right then and there that I was missing a cut of fabric. So I went to that quilt shop the next day, and they actually gave me a free book for telling them that, because it saved them a big headache once they started mailing this kit out and stuff. So it doesn't happen that often, and if you are missing something, it's better to find out about it when it's a new print of fabric, a new line that's come out. Otherwise, if you wait and you don't do it for 2 years, you don't know if you can get the right piece of fabric or not. So that's a good tip for y'all. So the next thing I do is I go through, get my instructions out, and I actually label all of my fabric pieces. So, excuse me, the white is used for it's got 2 letters for it. It's going to be A and H. And I've got a little sticky here, and I've done that for all of the fabrics here. It just helps me keep organized. And on this kit, some of these fabrics are kind of similar, so it's better to keep my stuff organized from the get-go. So I always do that for every kit that I'm going to work on. So the next thing is, the first thing we're going to do with this white fabric is we're going to cut 7 strips that are only 1 5/8 inch wide. And that to me set off like a light bulb, because it's not a typical cutting width. Usually it's like within like a quarter, like 2.5, 2 1/4, 3.5, or whatever. So that just told me that it's something that's going to be very precise. So what I decided to do is and we're talking about this cross, this kind of cross piece that's in the quilt. These little blocks there. So I grabbed some scrapped fabric, leftovers from a different project, and I made one. And it's supposed to measure 5 inches. But when I actually got my ruler out and I measured it, it's more like 4 7/8. And that's not going to cut it for this kit. It doesn't work usually for any kit. And so I went back and I double checked, and I kind of thought, well, that looks like it's pretty close to a 1/4 inch seam, but I could do better. So I double checked to make sure that my 1/4 inch foot was in the right, that I was using that, and that my stitch was at the right place, the stitch width and the whole thing. So I actually made this block on a different sewing machine, which you don't think is that big of a deal. But when I come and I sew on the Bernina back here, it's a little foreign to me because I'm so used to sewing on my Janome. But I double checked. The first thing I did is I did a sample seam to make sure that what I am stitching is truly a 1/4 inch. And excuse me, I compared my original block with the one I did today, and it's hard to tell, but I want to see if I can get this lined up. We can get a shot of this, because you can tell I got white thread, and that may not show up. But there is a very slight difference in the width of those 2 seams. So after I double checked my 1/4 inch to make sure I was doing the proper 1/4 inch seam, I made a second sample block. And so now that I know that I've got my 1/4 inch worked out on this machine, and it's going to be pretty more accurate. That's more accurate than it was when I did the first block. We're going to go ahead and cut this. And the first thing I do, and it's weird because I'm sitting down, but this table's a little bit lower, but we're going to make it work. So I always take and make sure I've got a good solid straight edge before I start measuring anything. So I'm going to give myself a clean cutting edge. And I don't think I got it here. Yeah, I could tell by the sound my blade made. I didn't have it cut all the way, so there we go. And this is maybe one reason why I don't sit down and cut. You don't get the same amount of pressure that you get from when you're standing up, but that's it. So now I know that's a really good edge. So I'm gonna flip it on over, trying to make sure that I keep my raw edges even here. Okay. And the other thing, when you're worried about whether or not you can really get that very accurate 1/4 inch seam, is you want to make sure your cutting is just as accurate as you're sewing. So on here there's a couple, since there is a product that we sell, it's called highlighting tape, and I've got some samples here. I don't think we sell that here at My Favorite Quilt Store, but like at any other sewing supply house, even Walmart probably has it. Sometimes it comes as a 1/4 inch width, and then and this one you would have to like pull it open, and then you'd have to cut it off. This one I love because it comes like Scotch tape makes it real easy to just take it off. So I am going to put on my ruler, since it's an odd number, it's not just 1 1/2, it's 1 5/8. I am going to stick this on the cutting line of where I want to. So it's just going to help remind me when I'm placing my ruler to do any of my cutting for this. That's where I want. It's not 1 1/2, it's 1 5/8. So get ready, we'll make our first cut. Okay. Oh, looky there, I've got it done in one cut. So and I've got to cut, according to my instructions, I need to cut 7 of these. So I'm going to cut it out of the white fabric. Then I'm also going to cut it out. The next thing it tells me, I've got to cut just as many out of the polka dot fabric. So that's what I'm going to do. And then once we get that done, we'll be ready to start sewing these together. And the first thing we're going to do in this kit is we're going to make these little blocks here. So just like I said, accuracy counts in any quilt, but just make sure, since it's an odd little number, that when you're doing your piecing, you're staying right on that 1/4 inch line. And if you're having trouble following it on your machine, if you really need to, you can mark it on your fabric. But I'm thinking that if you've got the right kind of presser foot or anything like that, the 1/4 inch foot. On this one, it's a 1/4 inch foot, and I've got to put my fabric right on the edge of that foot and just keep it going, because a little bit off can make, like I said, I already told you my story about how these two differed. And I could have made this work if I really wanted to, but, and the other thing sometimes, and I don't know if this is a big deal or not, but sometimes fabrics come in, I don't want to say different weights. This is like a cone of cotton, I believe. So it's usually a little bit thicker. And when I pick up this one, I can already tell just by holding it, it's a little lighter in weight. And to me, it's a little bit thinner. And I love sewing on these fabrics, believe me. But I can already tell. A lot of times your instructions are going to tell you to press to the dark side, and that's what this kit tells you. And normally that's what I do. But when I made my sample block, I noticed that my black fabric was a little bit thicker than my light bluish gray stuff. And in my first one, I followed the instructions and I pressed it to the dark side. And that could be one reason why this piece, not only is my seam a slightly bit larger than a true 1/4 inch, but when you do that fold over, when you're pressing, because you press it all to one side, you actually lose a little bit of you takes up a little bit more fabric. So when I made this second one, I actually pressed it to, I took and made sure that the fabric was pressed, this is the second one, and I pressed it towards the lighter fabric, not the lighter color, the fabric that's thinner, I guess. And that, because it's thinner, it's not going to use as much fabric to when you make that fold in your press. And I don't know if that's confusing or not, but it helps when you want to go for accuracy. But I've cut all my squares out. I did all my cutting, and I even sewed my first 2 strips together. And you'll know that you did this correctly and you got a really accurate 1/4 inch seam if your strip measures from side to side 2 3/4. And it does. And isn't that funny? Because that's the next thing we do. We cut them into strips, little pieces of 2 3/4 inches wide. So you're going to have these little squares. And that's what's going to help you make this block right here. And we make a bunch of these. I forget how many. We make 22. So, and just between you and me, you know, this is my 4th time I'm making this kit, and I was able to get everything I needed out of 6 strips. But that's if you don't have any issues with your cutting. And just be very careful. The one thing I want to remind you when you're cutting this, you think you've taken your time and sewed a nice, pretty straight seam. Sometimes if you just keep cutting and cutting and cutting, you can get off a little bit. And what I mean, you can be a little bit crooked. So I like to find a solid line on my ruler, and I run that on my seam allowance, or right on my seam where the 2 colors meet. And that helps me keep it straight, and I make sure that I'm cutting at 2 3/4, excuse me. Because if I don't keep that line straight, I wind up getting them a little crooked, and you don't think it shows, but when you've got a darker fabric up against a white fabric, every little mistake sometimes can show. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to cut 4 because I'm going to show you what it's going to look like. You'll see how easy this is once you get going. Cut one more. But remember, you're going to cut all your strips. You need to cut. I think they tell you in the instructions how many to cut. Pieces. If we need 22, probably in the 80s, I bet. 88. I was right. I was doing the math in my head. So the next thing is we're going to put this together. This is how you're going to sew it. I'm going to use my design wall. We've got one piece going this way. And the next piece is going to go like this. Then we've got this. And then we've got this. It's a little crooked, sorry about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew these 2 together, and then I'm going to sew these 2 together, and then you sew the 2 together, and that's how you wind up with your square. So just, and I like to go with a black line. So it's 1 2 3/4, and you want to make sure that black line stays on the seam. I am piecing some blocks right now, and I always like to do that. I do it where you can it's called chain stitching. You just do it all together. And I always start with a little lead. And some older sewing machines, sometimes when you start sewing, your thread gets all caught down and below, and you get like this little bird's nest or whatever you want to call it. This prevents that. So I actually use, when I have extra, once I finish binding a quilt, you know, what do you do with that extra binding? I just cut off like 2.5 inches or whatever, and I just start sewing like this, and then I'm ready to sew my pieces, and you can follow me. We'll do this one. So I'm ready to sew it, and I pin, like even this small, it's only 2 3/4. I put pins in. People think that's crazy, and I actually sew over my pins, but I'm not one of those that zoom fast. I go slow, and most modern day machines, they're built and they have the technology to know that if you come and you hit a pin, it's gonna like bounce off that. So, but don't think you can run over your pins and go 50 miles an hour. So I always just take it slow. So. But so I have a pin here because I've got a seam underneath there, okay? And the other thing I like having a pin, it helps me, it helps me guide my fabric to make sure I stay true to my 1/4 inch seam. So There's benefits, but you do what you feel more comfortable with, okay? And a lot of times I'll just take my pin out after I've sewn it. So instead of cutting my thread there, I'm just gonna do my next piece. And again, I'm gonna stick it under the presser foot. And I leave about anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch. And again, I can remove this. And you just keep doing this and you get along. And all it is you just give it a little clip right in the middle. And by doing that, I don't know if you can see this, by sewing in between there, your threads are like wrapped around each other. So when you go to press these, and you're gonna be handling these a lot when you pin these to the next section in your quilt, you don't have the problem with your seams starting to come unsewn. And that can be, like on this one, I've got a longer lead, but again, it's not gonna come apart. And that's I don't know if you've ever had that problem when you go to piece, especially on the edges of your quilt. Sometimes your quilter doesn't like it when your seams start to come apart on the edge, and this is a way to prevent that. Plus, in my opinion, you're saving a little bit of thread, because every time you pull that out and cut it, you're wasting a good 2 to 3 inches of thread. This saves you thread. And again, once I get done sewing all of my pieces, then again I take my lead back here, put it under my needle, and I can trim it off.
Okay.
Right here? Okay. And I cut it close to my lead, not my fabric, so I've got that little bit of extra thread. And you can just sew all of these. I've got this whole pile here that I need to sew. I could just keep going and keep going and keep going. And it just makes things a little bit easier and a way for you to stay organized. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is your stitch length. Most machines today, you're able to press a button and adjust it, but if you've got an older machine, you've got to figure out a way to do that. And most machines, when you turn your machine on, and it always defaults to a regular straight stitch, most machines default to 2.4 or 2.5. And that's just a little too far apart for quilting needs and stuff. A lot of people say they start at 2.0. 2.0 is a little tight for me, because if I make a mistake, and that happens every now and again, it makes ripping that seam out more difficult. So I just start at 2.10. And that, again, is going to help with making sure that your seams don't start to unravel. And so I never want to see anybody just come in, when you cut your threads right next to the edge of your fabric, that's going to allow for that seam to start coming apart. And if you have this little bit of a tail, and if you keep it right at 1/4 of an inch, that's all going to be covered in your seam allowance when you're done with everything. So those are just some simple tips that you can use as you do your quilting to help things go a little more smoothly, and sometimes a lot quicker, and you're going to save a little bit of thread in the process. And I'm going to give you another tip on pressing. I got my pieces here, and I'm going to set it by pressing it, setting the seam. And when I do this, and what I used to always do is just press to one side, but I don't like to do that because it can make things a little bulky. So what I'm going to do, I always try, if I can, you learn to press to the dark side. So on this, we're going to make this, it's sewing four little blocks together, and in that middle, if you press it all to one side, it can be a little bulky there. So a way to prevent that, and this will slow your process down of pressing, and you don't have to do this. This is just a tip. So it's a twist thing. So I'll take this one and press this to the dark, and then I'll flip this around, and again, I'm going to press this side to the dark and get a good press in there, okay? And then I come and I take this, and it like pops open. I don't know if you could see that. So now you get this little twist, and instead of having all this fabric on one side that's going to make that pretty bulky in there, it's spread out. And you do it, and you don't have a big like pile in the middle. And what's foreign for a lot of quilters is that, you know, if you were taught, if you ever took, like I went, even though I was a seamstress since I was a little girl, when I started to quilt, I did decide to take a beginning quilters class because I wanted to get tips and whatever. And I was always told that when you press from the top side. You don't press like this. And the technique that I just showed you goes against all that. It's totally opposite. But I want to make sure you understand this. And those stitches will just kind of pop out when you do it. And it's still very secure in the middle. It's not going to fall apart. But it just makes it less bulky. You don't have this big bump here. And for most quilters, that doesn't bother them. And a lot of times, once you get the kit, your quilt quilted, it's not going to matter. So this is a tip. And sometimes, if you've got fabric that's a little thicker, like this is Kona cotton, which is a lot thicker than this Kaffe fabric here. So it probably isn't an issue, but it just makes it, like I said, it's just not as bulky. And if that's something that interests you, you should try it and see if you like it.